Our next speaker is Dr. Amy Lubik. Dr. Lubik has won awards for her research in my tongue's getting tired here. For her research on hormone interactions in prostate cancer, and her current work focuses on environmental health, particularly related to climate change and health equity. She is a member for the Public Health Association of BC, Policy, Advocacy and Research Committee, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, and the Bridge for Health Co-op. She was the founder of the Queensland University of Technology chapter of Universities Allied for Essential Medicines, an alumna of the Next Up Leadership Program, and SFU Radius Fellowship for Radical Doers. She also is a long-term volunteer and community organizer for Amnesty International, Lead Now, and Force of Nature Alliance. Please welcome her.
I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak to you guys today here on beautiful Coast Salish territory, unceded Coast Salish territory, and on behalf of Bridge for Health. And thank you all for coming and staying. So when I think about the importance of science, it's hard not to think about what's going on south of the border, where climate science has been stripped from the mandate of the Environmental Protection Agency. So it makes me really happy to see all the pussy hats out here. Disregarding that 97% of scientists believe that the majority of climate change is caused by humans is irresponsible. The scientific journal, The Lancet, says that climate change is the #1 threat to human and planetary health of our time. And what is science for, if not to improve our health? As my nana used to say, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. In most of Canada, we haven't seen as life-threatening climate events as other parts of the world have, or as frequently. But we're already seeing some pretty shocking extreme weather. I'm sure everyone here remembers 2 years ago, the horrendous forest fires that happened up in the interior when the smoke came down as far as Vancouver. I was driving up there at that point, and it was like driving into Armageddon. These kind of events are extremely hazardous to our health. Children living up there with asthma and lung disease, and asthma is the #1 cause of hospitalization of kids in Canada, we're homebound. And we won't know the long-term health consequences of those kind of events for quite a while to come. Across Canada, we are seeing heat waves that are already starting to kill hundreds of people. And it's only going to get worse if we don't do something about our climate change situation. But it's through our science and our research that we know how to predict these events, and we know how to take care of those who are most vulnerable in our society. To things like heat waves, that's the elderly, that's our grandparents, and we need to know how to take care of them in those situations. Canada seems like it's not warming as badly as the rest of the world, but we're actually warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. And in the northern parts, we're warming even faster than that. Ice bridges that are used to bring in supplies in communities are melting. And habitats for game that are essential to survival are being destroyed. Whole communities are starting to think that they're going to have to migrate to get away from the changing climate. And that's already happening in places like Alaska, where you have whole communities disappearing off of ice shelves because the permafrost is melting and collapsing into the ocean. For me, for the last couple of years, we haven't seen a snowpack in the spring on our mountains here. And that's pretty traumatic for me myself. I can only imagine what it's like for communities up north that are seeing glaciers that they are used to seeing receding and permafrost disappearing. Communities are going through immense psychological trauma when they see those type of things happening. And we need science to understand what the impacts on frontline communities are going to be. And we need to know what the resources are to help those people, our fellow humans, with not only physical resources, because a lot of those communities don't have a lot to begin with, but also with resources for counseling, for the psychological trauma that comes with seeing the landscape that you know being completely decimated. So I was really excited to see there was a climate justice sign that came walking with us, and that's so important to remember. With these changes happening in Canada, they're small compared to what's happening in the rest of the world. Third world countries don't have the knowledge or the resources to deal with this the way that Canada does. The World Health Organization estimates that 150,000 people per year are dying due to climate change-related events. And by 2030, that could end up being around 250,000 people per year. Unlike in BC, where climate change may actually help our agricultural productivity, which is one of the reasons why we need to protect our farmland, places like Africa are being decimated by plagues and famines. All across the world, we're seeing the spread of diseases that are caused by different organisms like rats or mosquitoes like malaria. And that affects children more than it affects anybody else. But there are scientists that are using their knowledge to understand the migration of these kind of insects and vectors so that we can know how to prevent people from being sick in the first place, and trying to work around patents so they can find cheap ways to treat people. In places like Pakistan, floods and mudslides are decimating the country, but you have scientists and engineers working as hard as they can to find cheap and easy solutions to provide clean drinking water. So the majority of people who suffer from these climate change events in the global south have extremely small carbon footprints and don't contribute very much to climate change. But those in the global north and the wealthy countries are the ones who have benefited from carbon-intensive industries that have caused our changing climate. So it's up to us, it's up to countries like Canada to fund the research that can help people around the world, as well as here at home. It's up to us to empower those communities to be resilient to climate change and to climate-related disasters. Whole communities are disappearing beneath the ocean, and we need to be able to support our fellow humans as they migrate away from the only homes that they've ever known. Canada is not on track to meet our Paris climate targets, and BC is currently projected to blast way past what we're even usually doing. We can't keep relying on fossil fuel-based industries. It's like saying we don't care about those other people who are dying around the world. But the wonderful thing is, as much as climate change is the greatest threat to our health, it's also the greatest opportunity to come together. No one wants people who depend on the oil and gas industries for their livelihood to lose their jobs. And so we need a just transition over to renewable energy sources. And here in Canada, we already have organizations trying to do that. There's a wonderful organization called Iron and Earth that's retraining oil sands workers in solar and wind and renewable energy. We could expand that. In the US, there are communities that have been ravaged by natural disasters and job loss. But when the communities come together, they can rebuild and have rebuilt off of solar and wind energy. And not only does that rebuild their communities, that brings people out of poverty. So communities are not just rebuilt, but they're thriving. Wouldn't it be great if Canada had an agenda that was to not only support science and technology to curb climate change, but also to pull people out of poverty, not only here, but around the world? We can be global leaders in creating a healthy planet. And that's the power of science. That's why we're here today. And I'm not just talking about Western science. One of the first speakers was talking about natural wisdom and understanding our planet. And that's so important as well. So thank you all for being here and standing up for science.